Until now, we've been occupied mostly with the subject of dharma, with the theory and practice of dharma. During this time, we have also learned much about the doctrine of karma and something about divine grace. At the end of our discussions last week, we have seen that the aim of all ethics and morality is to enable us to enter the higher world of spirituality, adhyatma. Whatever we have learned about dharma, karma, samsara, it is all purposefully designed to lead us there, to adhyatma. The practice of dharma is only the first stage of our spiritual journey. Dharma should lead to adhyatma because our final destination is moksha. We don't intend to spend all our lives in school, but to pass out of it. So moksha, liberation of the soul, that is our final destination. And dharma is only a means for the attainment of that. That means morality and spirituality are not the same. But before acquiring moral purity, no one can approach God, no one can enter the world of spirituality. One who hasn't made oneself pure in thought, word, and deed, one who hasn't worked hard through strenuous effort to purify oneself, one doesn't have the necessary qualification, one is not yet competent, and such a person will not even know that there is a spiritual world. That is why in the first stage of our journey towards moksha, we try to equip ourselves as best as possible. We try to become dharmatmas or dharmic people. But why is morality not enough? What does it mean to say that morality and spirituality are not the same? We already saw last week how there is no finality, no completeness in morality. Mere morality can never give the soul the permanent satisfaction it is searching for. Because the soul is infinite and eternal. In its real nature, it doesn't belong to this relative world, whereas morality belongs here, to this world of duality and contradiction. So long as we are still practicing moral and ethical disciplines, as long as we are still cultivating dharmic qualities, still busy with that, it means we are still busy with the world. We are still outside the temple, still struggling. It shows we are still not able to leave it all behind and enter the temple. And no real freedom is possible as long as we are still outside, caught in the domain of dharma and adharma. That is why Vedanta says, dharma should not be made an end in itself. Its aim is only to lead us to a higher state where all dharma and adharma is left behind. In fact, the whole of moral life is characterized by this struggle. Struggle is characteristic of moral life. We can hardly think of moral life without struggle. It's a relentless, continuous struggle against imperfection. But this imperfection is again a characteristic of the relative plane. Relativity means imperfection. At every stage of moral progress, we are faced with higher and higher ideals of perfection. But as I said, perfection is like the ever receding horizon. It can never be reached on the relative plane. It only keeps us working harder and harder, making us want to become better and better until we are exhausted. At last, in our utter helplessness, we begin to yearn for something. Our soul begins to long for something that gives some meaning to its little endless struggles. And that's something that gives the meaning we are looking for, that also gives hope and assurance. And that something is spirituality, adhyatma. That is what releases from our bondage to the world of dharma and adharma. It frees us from our shackles and lifts us up to a larger, freer life of the spirit. So, we can't rise above dharma and adharma as long as we want something from this world. That is what it all comes to. As long as we have desires for enjoyment, including legitimate desires, what we call natural, normal desires. As long as we want anything from this world, we are forced to work for their satisfaction. And thus we wander about all over the earth for the sake of this elusive happiness. We don't find it anywhere. We only become tired and weary when, because of our attachment to the world, I repeat, because of our attachment to the world, when we suffer only misery, we feel an urge to give it all up. We feel an urge for dispassion, for renunciation. But then most of us cannot renounce this world without first experiencing a little of it. This also we have seen. But once we have seen enough of it, once, as we say, once we have had it, then we can think of God. Then, free from worry, free from struggles, then we can meditate on God. It brings to mind that old Mundakopanishad allegory of the two birds, and also what Swami Vivekananda said about that allegory. He made some comments on that. There are two birds sitting on the same tree, one on the top and the other below. The bird at the top is calm, quiet, aloof. It is immersed in its own glory. It is, there is something special about it. It is majestic. It doesn't belong to this world. There is a certain detachment in its bearing. But the one on the lower branches is busy tasting the fruits of the tree. And as it happens, some fruits are sweet and some fruits are bitter. As this lower bird hops from branch to branch, eating the fruits, sweet and bitter, it becomes happy and miserable alternately. Now happy, now miserable. After some time, says Swami Vivekananda, after some time, the lower bird eats a very bitter fruit and becomes disgusted. It becomes disgusted not only with the fruit but with itself, because deep down it knows it shouldn't be doing that. Then it looks up and sees the other bird sitting on the top. The higher bird appears wonderful with its shining, golden, colorful feathers. It is not at all interested in the fruits. It doesn't eat either sweet or bitter fruit. And so, it is neither happy nor miserable. It is just calm, absorbed in itself. It is anchored in its own self. Sees nothing beyond its own self, the higher self, I mean. The lower bird longs for this condition, but it can't help itself. It soon forgets it all and again begins to eat the fruits. And in a little while, it gets another exceptionally bad fruit, which makes it feel miserable. And he again looks up and tries to get nearer to the upper bird. But again it forgets. And after some time it looks up again. This goes on and on and on until the lower bird comes very near to the beautiful bird at the top. Then something wonderful begins to happen. It begins to see a spiritual, a divine light coming from the higher bird's body and playing around its own body, that is, around the body of the lower bird. And it feels a change coming over it. And it keeps moving closer and closer to the higher bird, and at last it understands, it sees a wonderful change. Swamiji says, the lower bird, however substantial it may look, however real it may look, the lower bird is only a shadow of the higher bird. It's only a reflection of the upper bird. But in essence, it was itself the upper bird all the time. The little lower bird, with all its eating of sweet and bitter fruits, it's becoming happy and miserable by turns. Everything was only an illusion, just a dream. All along, the real bird was there above, calm, silent, majestic. It was always beyond grief, beyond sorrow, not involved in the joys and happinesses of relativity. According to according to the Upanishad, the upper bird is none other than God, the Lord of the universe. And the lower bird is the ignorant human soul eating the sweet and bitter fruits of this world. Now and then, a heavy blow falls on the soul. For a time, it stops the eating and moves towards this unknown God. But gradually, a flood of light comes and it begins to see that this world is only a passing show. It's not real. But again and again, past habit, samskaras, the senses drag the soul down, and it begins as before to eat the sweet and bitter fruits of the world, in spite of itself. And again an exceptionally hard blow comes, and the heart again opens to the divine light. This is how the soul slowly, gradually detaches itself from the world and approaches God. And as it gets nearer and nearer, it finds itself melting away, merging into God. This is what happens when we live in this world bound by the laws of dharma and adharma. So this is how dharma, ethical life, slowly leads to adhyatma or spiritual life. Our morality should lead us to God realization. Entering the spiritual world means going beyond mere morality and ethics. According to Hinduism, our psychophysical personality, this body-mind complex, not only that, in fact, our entire life, everything in this world is governed by three factors, what we call gunas: sattva, rajas, and tamas. These gunas always exist in combination. They don't exist independent of one another. They are always together. Rajas means restlessness. It's the active principle. Tamas is the principle of inertia. And sattva, which is serenity, harmony, that is the balance between rajas and tamas. And whenever this balance is upset, there we see activity, rajas. So everything in the relative world, every object, not only objects, every experience is compounded of these three gunas. Samsara or relativity is the realm of the gunas, and freedom, moksha, is beyond them. The Upanishads say even the highest experiences of heaven, even they come within the realm of the gunas, and so they are also limited by the laws of nature. The extent of nature doesn't end with our little world. Nature includes everything that is to be found in relative existence. Our bodies and minds are, of course, products of nature. And so, just as our bodies, our mental temperament, that also depends on how much of which guna we have in our personality. That is important. how much of which guna we have determines our temperament. In fact, the main problem of spiritual life is the adjustment of these gunas in us. They are like a ladder leading to the roof. Tamasic people should become Rajasic, and Rajasic people should become Sattvic. The lazy should become active, and the active should become calm. When there is more sattva, the mind becomes pure and clear. So, we could say sattva is the topmost rung of the ladder, leading to truth, leading to freedom. But in the end, even that has to be transcended. Even sattva has to be left behind. You know that parable of Sri Ramakrishna's, where he actually compares the three gunas to three robbers. He says, under the spell of God's Maya, man forgets his true nature. It is God's Maya, which is composed of the three gunas, that makes us forget who we are. Man forgets that he is heir to the infinite glories of his Father. It is much like Jesus' parable of the prodigal son, which we heard last week. Sri Ramakrishna also says, man forgets that he is heir to the infinite glories of his Father. This divine Maya is made up of three gunas, and all three are robbers. For they rob man of all his treasures and make him forget his true nature. Swamiji says, Swami Vivekananda, dharma and adharma, both are chains. Both are robbers. Adharma is an iron chain, and dharma is only a golden chain. That doesn't mean that it is less strong to bind. Dharma also binds. So, the three gunas are sattva, rajas and tamas. But Sri Ramakrishna says, of these three, sattva alone points the way to God. But even sattva cannot take a man to God. And then he tells the story. Once, a rich man was passing through a forest. And as he was traveling through the forest, three robbers surround him and rob him of everything he had. After they had snatched all his possessions from him, one of the robbers said, What's the good of keeping this man alive? Let us kill him off, finish him off. Saying that, he was actually about to strike their victim with a sword, but the second robber interrupts him and says, yeah, but what's the point in killing him? We only have to take care that he doesn't bring any trouble. So let us bind him up here, let us tie him up here and leave him to his fate. He won't be able to go tell the police. That should be enough. So the robbers tie him up with a rope and leave him to his fate and go away. But after a while, the third robber returns to the rich man and says, sir, you are badly hurt, aren't you? Come, I am going to release you. I'll set you free. Then this third robber, who comes back to the rich man, he sets the man free, leads him out of the forest, and when they come near the highway, he says, "Sir, follow this road and you will reach home easily." But the rich man says, "But you must come with me also. Please do come. You have done so much for me. You have saved my life. We'll all be very happy to see you at my home." But the robber says, "No, that won't be possible for me. I can't enter the village because then the police will arrest me." And saying that, he leaves the rich man and pointing out his way, he goes away. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, the first robber who said, "What's the good of keeping this man alive? Kill him." That is tamas. That is what destroys. The second robber, which binds the man to the world, which entangles him in a variety of activities, good and bad, that is the second robber. That is rajas. That is creativity. And rajas makes us forget God. So, sattva alone shows the way to God. This sattva produces virtues like compassion, righteousness, devotion to God, and such other things. But Sri Ramakrishna says, sattva is like the last step of the stairs. Next to it is the roof. The ladder does not belong to the roof. Sri Ramakrishna says, the supreme Brahman, which is beyond the three gunas, that is the ladder, the roof which is above the ladder, that is man's own abode. One cannot attain knowledge of Brahman unless one transcends all three gunas. Now let us remind ourselves once again, our goal is self-realization. That is, to realize God within ourselves first, and then to see Him in all others. And who is our ideal? Our goal is moksha, but who is our ideal? Our ideal is the person who is not bound by any gunas. That is the one whom we should follow, the one who has gone beyond dharma and adharma, who has known God. That person has first gotten rid of all his evil tendencies with the help of purity of character. With the help of the practice of dharma, he has risen above even sattva and at last reached the transcendental plane. Such a person's mind can at most come down to the level of sattva, but it can never again go below that. So, that person is our ideal. All this shows that mere morality or ethics, mere dharma, does not make a person spiritual. Mere morality, it is no proof whatever of a person's spirituality. This is one mistake that so-called religious people generally make. People who are only superficially spiritual. They tend to make morality the be-all and end-all of life. Of course, morality is necessary. There can be no spirituality without first leading a strictly moral life, but still, morality cannot claim to be spirituality. That spirituality that transcends far, that is much above the plane of morals. So Vedanta says it is not enough to perform your duties scrupulously. It is not enough if you do selfless acts and lead a moral life. You need something more. You must attain self-knowledge, and through that self-knowledge you must realize your freedom. That is your ultimate duty as a human being. That is what Vedanta says. Selfless action, ethical disciplines, these are all only stepping stones, means for the purification of the heart, without which nobody can attain self-knowledge. But the goal itself is the attainment of Satchidananda and freedom. This freedom is already within us. It is our real nature. Only for the time being, it is covered by impurities of the heart. And the practice of dharma only removes these impurities, and then the real Atman shines forth by itself. Now, impurity doesn't mean just bad thoughts. They are not just wrong passions. Even the so-called good impulses, good thoughts, these are also obstacles, because they hinder, they come in the way of our concentration on the pure Atman. That is why even good thoughts are also regarded as impurities from a spiritual point of view. So, our teachers say, if we want to be ethical, we have to destroy, that is to say, not destroy in a violent way. If we want to be ethical, we have to sublimate our bad thoughts, our bad impressions, samskaras. This is what ethical life demands. It demands that we sublimate our lower samskaras. In just the same way, if we want to be spiritual, then we have to destroy. That is to say, we have to transcend even good thoughts and impulses. That is what spiritual life demands. That is why spiritual aspirants are asked to outgrow so-called conventional good conduct. Not to get stuck up at school, but to come out of it. To come out of it means not by playing truant. You have to pass out of school in the right way. So we see that morality always leads to spirituality, and spirituality on its part always strengthens morality. It makes us morally strong. Whenever spirituality results in weakness, or whenever it seems to tolerate anything that is basically immoral, then there is something wrong with that spirituality. Very often, shady things, dubious, questionable practices disguise themselves as spirituality. This is what we have to be careful about. So, whenever demands are made in the name of spirituality, demands that outrage our moral sense, demands that go against the fundamental laws of humanity. Whenever we see such things happening, we have to be suspicious of this so-called spirituality. We should be careful to distinguish genuine spirituality from fake spirituality. A pseudo-spiritual person is, of course, far, far inferior to a moral person. There can't be any comparison between a hypocrite and a strictly moral person. But of course, on the other hand, a genuine spiritual person is far above, far superior to a merely moral person. You see the difference. But now, how exactly does a spiritual person differ from somebody who is merely moral? In what way is the one different from the other? It is like asking, what is the difference between the whole and the part? The whole can contain the part, but the part belongs to the whole. The part cannot contain the whole. I'll try to explain. Just one thing decides the whole question. Is the person selfish or selfless? Selflessness or selfishness? That makes all the difference between the two. The moral person, please forgive me for using a strong word now. The moral person is like a mercenary. You know, a mercenary, a professional soldier who fights for money. No doubt, he is an honest mercenary. He has certain principles and he sticks to them. But a spiritual person is like a patriot, an ardent, fiery patriot. Both mercenary and patriot fight. Both of them fight well. Just remember what we heard about the difference between a mere karmi and a karma yogi. It is the same thing. Both of them work well with equal energy. In the same way, both of them here, the moral person and the spiritual person, both of them fight and both of them fight well. But the mercenary fights for a small gain for himself, whereas the patriot fights for his country, forgetting himself. That is the difference. And it's not a small difference. A merely moral life cannot give us the feeling of love, joy. It can't give us the feeling of exaltation that spiritual life gives. A merely moral person doesn't have that spirit of courage, that spirit of self-sacrifice that a spiritual person has. Mere morality, it can never erase our sense of individuality and separateness, because we are always stressing our egos. Morality always emphasizes our ego and separateness. I must become better, better, better. It may be good, but it is not spiritual. Only spirituality makes us whole. So, this work of erasing our sense of separateness, our notion of individuality, that is left to spirituality. Actually, what is sin? Some time ago, we heard that selfishness was sin. Selfishness is sin. To wipe out our sense of sin, that is to say, to wipe out our sense of separateness, that is left to spirituality. Even if they are not entirely wiped out, they are at least made ineffectual. Sri Ramakrishna says, the desire, anger, and egotism of one who has known God. See, it sounds like a contradiction. How can one who has known God still have desire, anger, and egotism? But Sri Ramakrishna says they are only appearances. They are like a burnt string. It looks like a string, but a mere puff blows it away. He says, a jnani cannot injure, he can't hurt anybody. He becomes like a child. If a steel sword touches the philosopher's stone, it is transformed into gold, and gold cannot cut. Pure gold cannot cut. In the same way, it may seem from outside that a jnani also has anger and egotism, but in reality, he has no such thing. From a distance, a burnt string lying on the ground may look like a real one, but if you come near and blow at it, it disappears altogether. So, the anger and egotism of a jnani are mere appearances, they are not real. The ego that has been burnt in the fire of knowledge cannot hurt anybody, it cannot injure. It is an ego only in name. This is what Sri Ramakrishna says. But how is this knowledge, how is this knowledge of God realized? How do we attain it? Sri Ramakrishna says, God is realized as soon as the mind becomes free from attachment. Whatever appears in the pure mind is the voice of God. That which is pure mind is also pure Atman, because there is nothing pure but God. If something is absolutely pure, then it can only be God. But in order to realize that God, one must go beyond dharma and adharma. This is very important. God is realized as soon as the mind becomes free from attachment. Whatever appears in the pure mind is the voice of God, and that which is pure mind is also pure Atman. But in order to realize God, one must go beyond dharma and adharma. You know, this prayer that Sri Ramakrishna used to address to the Divine Mother. Mother, here is your dharma, here is your adharma, take them both, but give me pure love for your lotus feet. God is purity itself. God is perfection itself. So by surrendering ourselves to Him, by taking refuge in Him, we leave our sense of sin, we leave our sense of separateness, individuality behind. And now begins the second stage of our long journey towards freedom, towards God. In the first stage, we had busied ourselves with human society. We had been preoccupied with our social relationships, responsibilities, with all their complexities. Now we have reached the point where we have begun to feel that we have had enough of it all. Our soul is yearning, longing for something higher. So now the ascent, the climb begins. From this stage, the voices of the human world, the demands of the human world start to fade away. They are left behind us. And from now on, we have to climb. And we have to climb mostly alone. That is why spiritual life is described as the flight of the alone to the alone. But still, it is good to know that we won't be entirely alone. God will certainly accompany us unseen. So at this point of the climb, just when we have begun the second stage of we were at this point of the climb where we see just a little light in the darkness, but we soon lose sight of it. And I was saying, it is not that God is an inconstant light, not that He is an inconstant friend or companion, but we are still unsteady in our approach. We still are not able to walk the spiritual path firmly. First of all, our eyes of flesh can't see Him, and the eye of spirit has yet to open. This is the condition we find ourselves in now. It is the eye of spirit, the eye of love, what the Bhagavad Gita calls the Jnana Chakshu, but we'll call it Prema Chakshu here, the eye of love. That is what we need in order to behold God. It is the eye of love that gives us the steadiness of spiritual vision. And how is that spiritual eye developed? How does that develop? We develop the spiritual eye by means of prayer, contemplation, and devotion to God. In a word, this Prema Chakshu, this eye of love, develops through bhakti. That brings us to bhakti yoga, the path of divine love. Love of God as a spiritual discipline. We all know the basics of it. This yoga rests on the simple truth that one can realize God just by loving Him. We don't have to do anything else, no physical exercise, no mental gymnastics, nothing of the sort. Bhakti yoga is said to be the easiest of all yogas because it doesn't make any unnatural demand on us. It doesn't require us to suppress any of our natural, normal impulses. We all know how emotional we are by nature. We are moved, we are swayed more by the emotion of love than by any other emotion. This we know. We love ourselves, we love our families, friends, we love our homes and possessions, we love money, pleasure, power, name, fame. As a matter of fact, what we love determines what we are. Our entire character and conduct are shaped by what we love. Love is what gives us joy. Love is what makes life interesting. Whether we admit it or not, we are all under the spell of love. We could not imagine life without love. It is such a basic, universal emotion.